Happy Thor's Day. Today I want to talk about performance poetry. Now, before I get on to my main topic, which is talking about performance poetry, or the power of performance poetry, I just want a little update on meditation yesterday regarding connecting to my new rune and disconnecting from the runes I've been working with. There have been on occasions that as I've meditated I felt a connection to Odin, and that didn't happen this time. It doesn't happen all the time either. What I did have was a raven's eye, and it was quite distinct and at times felt very much like it was looking into me, and at other times during the meditation I was looking into it. So I'm still, I suppose, working through that, thinking about it and obviously questioning myself and the whole experience, but worthy of note, I feel. Now, to talk about performance poetry, I've reached this point because there's a couple of pointers that might seem a little bit obscure that bring me to this point. Because towards the end of summer last year I started looking at the Old Norse words for the Havamal, and using the books I have and resources available, wanted to do my own translation to sort of just make some steps into understanding the language a little bit better and trying to understand how sort of different scholars and different authors or that have arrived at their differing translations. So what I really wanted to do, in part inspired by Maria Vilhorg, was what is the hard translation, i.e. what are the actual words without any embellishment. And I did that, and there were some interesting things that come up from it. In particular, the idea that when Odin hangs himself on the tree, that a suggestion of castration, which I've done some videos about, and I'm still sort of investigating that route, if you like. But what I noticed in particular was, in terms of reading, it's not very linear. So you have to kind of make sense of it, or as scholars and that have done, and I'm not questioning their wisdom, but they've added to it. Like with Odin hanging himself from a tree, it doesn't say Yggdrasil. We can assume, but it doesn't specify, and obviously most translations name Yggdrasil, or a lot of translations that I have seen name it. So it leads you with sort of, well, okay, how does this make sense? Because obviously we live in a modern world where information is better, more available, more detailed, more thought of, or more worked out. And I'm very conscious of the fact, it's from a personal level, it's a personal opinion, and I am not a scholar. I'm just an armchair guy. That perhaps language wasn't as developed at the time of the Poetic Edda being recorded or being written down that our modern language is. I know that there are similarities, there's evolution and that, but that we have to sort of not put today's rules of language onto language of, 1,000+ years ago. I'm not saying that people were less smart. It's more a case of different questions were asked, a different style of living was lived. I can't imagine Nordic people wondering about, are you using the right pronoun or the right verb to describe something, when it's just sort of like tree, and keeping the language to which they are using to say what it needs to say. Without doubt, one of the things with our very modern society is language is becoming very much a tripping point of what can you say, what can't you say. And all in all, really, I don't think in the past that would have been quite as complex. Now, in addition, before I get to what I want to perform, is I've had these ideas stewing for a number of months, really, and making some comparisons. It's like with the Celts and with the Druids, I know, though I might have to check sources just to make sure I'm not just going off, I think this is right. And the bard was like the apprentice druid. Not every bard became a druid. It's more a case of really the records of a people was passed and learned through an oral tradition, which is why, like with Norse paganism and probably lots of other cultures of that era, everything was learnt and carried on and not written down as a test of wisdom, and in sadness, something that has been lost, or in many cases has been lost, or the information we have today is reduced because of spiritual practice and law. And what I'm trying to get at is the skald, the performer, is very much sort of maybe the apprentice, Godi, or whichever sort of title you want to use for Nordic society. And very much, when you read the Poetic Edda, there's something about the Luspa obviously tells its story, but I also feel it's almost like an initiation story. So just to cut through, sort of keep it simple, obviously in the Luspa, Odin tests the Volva, the witch, the seer, to test her knowledge, to gauge how potent her prophecies or prophesizing is. And obviously you've got recountings of parts of the creation of the world, and in particular the one section that strikes me as being, this is where Odin tests the witch with exacting scrutiny. And if we take the Luspa as a story that apprentices are tested by telling, then when it comes to the naming of the dwarves, here you have your harshest crucible. Because to be honest, and again it's a personal opinion, from a storytelling perspective, the bit where all the dwarves get named is just like, it's a bit excessive. What purpose does this serve? And I can't help but think that when you've got your spiritual leader wanting to take on an apprentice or apprentices, that there's going to be a whittling down process, and they're going to test those that want to be in this section of the society by what do you know, how do you tell it. And then when we get to the Luspa, which obviously a popular story, the real sort of, yes, you can recount the convergence of fire and ice and the first of the Jotnar and that, but we really get to the test of your law when it gets to the naming of the dwarves, because that's a longish section, which if we add to this that the telling of these stories would have been the equivalent of our modern day Netflix or HBO and CGI and special effects. Historically, in these ages, they had storytelling around a fire. Now, I imagine there would always be a certain amount of theatrics. The Skald may be an expert storyteller or have a honeyed voice and sing songs in a way that they can entertain a gathering of people in a hall or around a fire of an evening to pass the time away. That doesn't mean they couldn't add theatrics, and I think these are things you can imagine or explore being done, and that's where we get to the more spiritual side, or how we add to the hard translations of, say, the Havamal, which is the bit I want to cover and try to sort of look at how it's expressed and told, and if you bring passion into it, that it might make sense in a way that just logic and scholarly pursuit won't necessarily take on board, because obviously feelings, emotions are not something that's easily quantifiable, or you can't, there's no meat and gravy to it, because it's emotion, and scholarly pursuit is not necessarily going to take into account emotion on the application of understanding how these things work. I think I'm on course here, and I'm not diverted too much to sort of get to the point I'm hoping to reach, which is the power of performance adds dimensions. I mean, there's a whole little bucket of faults that are spiking off of this that I'm still considering. That's just that sort of things you have to take into account also, such as memory, emotion, telling, listening, speaking, acting. It all adds up to a greater whole that really reinforces for me that the poetic Edda and the gods really have many dimensions to them, that if you just look at the flat words, you're missing a lot of detail. So, I've rambled on a bit. I'm going to conclude with something that I'm going to try and make sense of, but I'm not going to say I haven't practiced this, because I have a little bit, or I've been trying to think, how I would get into a video saying these things and it not just being sort of told in a Ferris Bueller teacher way of like Bueller, just like sort of monotone, boring. I'm saying the words. There's more to it. Performance matters. I've seen this at events with people who are much more skilled than I am in the way that they maybe they embellish on the story, add little quips or modernize some of the phrases. But the key ingredient really is they have the charisma to deliver the story in a way that entertains people. And then you can take away from it sort of, oh, well, maybe Loki wouldn't have felt like having to sort of arrange the death of Balder if he hadn't have been sort of kept out of a gathering of the Aesir. These are the things we have to decide. Anyhow, obviously this does tie in with the runes, and that's why I worked on translating this section of the Havermal, because it's about the runes. And let's see, I'm becoming more animated because I'm geeing myself up to try and get this across in a way that may offer some alternative approaches to understanding the hard translation of verses 138 to 145 of the Havermal. I might not read them all. I'm mainly focused on the first couple, and particularly the first verse. So here goes. Know I that I hang. Wind up, hurt on. No fate. 9. Speared, wounded, and found Odin. Self, ourselves, more. In discontent, hurt, your manning know where male of root run. We remains much schooled, no wide corners, new I lower, learned I up runes, yell, learned, fell I back, pad, great voice, 9 learned I of inside famed son Bolthorn, Bestler's father, and I drink of 2 whole in expansive meadows, scooping a glary. Unlearned I, from sink and foam being and grow and well, have fake words, more of words, words searched, work, more of work, works searched. Runes may you find. To line up runes, slender, large runes, slender, firm runes, or fade great powers. And the rain fell, and resist Hroptir's reign. Odin with as about, but thousands of years ago, and the dwarves stayed for a long time ago. I can resist myself in the summer. Know how much to cut, know what to do, know how much to get, know how to be tempted, know how to pray, know how wet it should be, know how much to send, know how to sow. It is better to obey than to overdo it. Is valid as a gift. It is better not to overdo it. So much for resistance to rain. He looked up when he came back. So there we go. Make of that what you will. I mean, in all fairness, even after this time of, I suppose, meditation or rumination or just simmering away in the back of my brain, this is something that's we're never really gonna know the answer to. I mean, I argued recently that really, even if someone was practicing in exactly the same way as our ancestors did, our modern world wouldn't allow that, wouldn't accept that person probably without sources to back it up, and there's never going to be those sources, and that's a sadness, I think. It's difficult, I know. We have to walk this path, sometimes alone, and share what we can and accept what we can and make the best of it. Ultimately, I'll always hold to and sometimes forget that the gods know what's in our hearts, and that is the most important thing. So, the power of performance poetry. If you're still here, thank you for listening. Maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. That's fine. It's your practice, my practice, our practice. We work it how it works for us. Do take care. Goodbye.